Hey Zoology, we have reached our final phylum in the worm unit, thank goodness. This is my favorite. I think these are the least nasty, and I think many of you can probably agree at this point that earthworms are actually not that gross when you compare them to the nematodes and the tapeworms. So let's go ahead and launch right into phylum Annelida. So some examples of annelids or Annelida would be earthworms, marine worms, and leeches. So a lot of worms that are not flatworms in the ocean are polychaete worms, which is a class of the annelids. But the examples you can write down would be earthworms, marine worms, and leeches. So this is not in our notes, but the question comes up, okay, well, why do we care about these? Well, they're found in a lot of different habitats. They burrow in the ground, whether they're burrowing in the sand underwater or whether they're burrowing into the actual soil. That's a lot of times where they spend their lives. They feed on organic matter, so they are also similar to the nematodes, big decomposers. So they aerate, they fertilize soil, they mix soil, they allow for proper drainage of soil by moving soil around. So they're extremely important for making sure that the soil on our planet is useful. So, important characteristics. The first one is segmentation. So they have repeating body segments. Each segment is extremely similar except for the first and last. This allows them to burrow a little bit easier. It also allows them to move a little bit easier. They have sophisticated nervous systems to kind of regulate all of those different segments. And it's a safety feature because if one of their segments goes wrong, well, they have other segments that can work. They can get rid of that segment. They can replace it. They can replicate, etc. So it kind of keeps them. It's almost like if you've heard about major cruise ships and ocean liners and things like that, where in their lower decks they have segments so that if there's a break or there's a breach of the hull of the ship, that they can lock down that particular area and only that area will flood. Same thing with these organisms. If they have something go wrong in one area of their body, they can kind of lock that area down. They have what's called setae or setae, and these are basically hair-like structures that are made out of chitin, which is what the shells of or the exoskeletons of arthropods, so insects and things like that, are made of. Very similar to what our fingernails are made out of. So they're little hairs, and they can kind of wiggle those, and that helps them push through soil and sand. Some annelids have those, but in congregations, and so they use them more like actual legs to actually push themselves through the soil, and they can be modified to do certain things. These are the first true coelomates. So they have a coelom that is segmented, but they have a coelom that runs all the way through their body. They are triploblastic, obviously, if they have a coelom, because they have a mesoderm, and they are protostomes like us. So they are segmented, like I mentioned, but the segments are body segments, and then they have a head segment, and then they have a butt segment. So they have a complete digestive tract, so a mouth on one end and an anus on the other. Their head is usually made up of two parts, not super big to get into, but we'll see a little bit about why that protostomium and the peristomium can be, or how they can be identified separately. But for us, we're just knowing, okay, so they have a complex head structure. They have longitudinal and circular muscles. So what happens is they have muscles running the whole length of their body, so they can contract and expand, and so they can kind of pull together and then push, and pull the back up and then push. So they have this ability to, it's called peristalsis is how it works. It's the same way that our intestinal tract or our esophagus works, where it essentially just kind of squeezes down. So that's what they do, is that's how they move. They contract those longitudinal muscles, it contracts their body, then they can push forward, contract their body, push forward, etc. And the circular muscles can help with that as well, with kind of pulling in certain parts, expanding other parts. So they just do this kind of like slinky type effect of that they come together and then push forward, come together, push forward. So that's their movement. That's how they are functioning when they move. So the three major classes, the first one is class Polychaeta. So these are often just referred to as the polychaetes. Poly means many, and chaeta means long hairs. So these are organisms that on their body have a lot of different setae. They have many setae per body segment. So you can see on the images down here, we have lots of little hairs sticking out A lot of them also have parapodia, so that's basically little fleshy arm-like things with the hair sticking out, and so that gives them a little bit more muscular control, allows them to move a little bit easier. They are dioecious, so that means that you are going to be finding males and females separately. They have to come together to actually reproduce. Some examples: clamworms, scaleworms, the ones that I would write down, fireworms and feather duster worms. So also Christmas tree worms. So these are the Christmas tree worms. We have feather dusters down here, fireworm right here. All of those little bristles have poison in them, and if they get into your skin, it's not pleasant. Feather dusters, this is not necessarily their segment. This is part of their head, but their body is segmented in their tube. So feather duster worms are unique in that they are similar to cnidarians in that they have these modified portions of their head that capture food in the water column, and then they use that to pull it down into their mouth. But inside their tube, they are segmented. They have parapodia. They have CT. So that's why they're polychaete worms. Had a tech issue, but now we're good. So the second class is Oligochaeta. Oligochaeta means oligo means few, and then chaeta, like we said, means hairs. So polychaeta are the many hairs. Oligochaeta are fewer hairs. So they still have CT, but they have very few of them, and so you can't really see them usually. A lot of these are actually found on land. So these are earthworms, essentially. They don't have any parapodia. They don't have an obvious head. They're hermaphroditic, as are a lot of the annelids, and these are the earthworms. Now, because we're doing a dissection on the earthworms, we're diving a little bit deeper into this particular class. So their digestive system, they have a muscular pharynx, which is basically inside of their head-like structure. So they use that to pull things in. Their digestive tract runs the entire length of their body, and they have complex parts to it called the crop and the gizzard. We're going to learn more about those in our actual in our actual dissection. But they help with mechanically breaking down. So it's essentially their chewing organs is the crop and the gizzard. Annelids, in terms of circulation, are the first organisms to have an actual circulatory system. So they have a closed circulatory system, meaning they have heart-like structures. They have 5 hearts, and they run the blood, they pump the blood through their main blood vessels, the dorsal blood vessel and the ventral blood vessel. So they actually have the ability to pump blood around their body. They're the first animals that we see that do. They have an excretory system made up of pairs of nephridia in the body segment. So these are similar to like the flame cells, but they are more like kidneys than anything else. So they are referred to as nephridia. The excretory system, again, nephridia. So we use these nephridia to filter the blood in each segment. So each segment has its own circulatory body, and it has its own kidney-like structures. So it filters the blood in each segment, and then it excretes it out the sides. So you can see there's excretory pores where they push out their excrement out the sides. So if they need to get rid of any chemicals or any toxins, they can do that. They have a much more advanced nervous system. So they have cephalization, where they have a lot of their nerves in the front of their body. And they have more than just nerves. They have ganglia. So this is the first time we're seeing the word ganglia. And ganglia basically means it's just a bunch of nerves that are starting to function together as one organ. So AKA, it's a very simplified brain. So we're, for the first time, seeing brain-like structures in these organisms, and they have nerve cords that run the entire length of their body and tell each body segment what to do at the correct time. Earthworm reproduction can be very complicated. So they're hermaphrodites, and when they fertilize, or when they're attempting to reproduce sexually, they essentially will secure their bodies together in opposite directions, so similar to how we saw in some of the flatworms. And they have this area of their body called the clitellum. So their entire body has segments that are pretty identical, and then they have this one section of their body where it looks like one giant segment. That's their clitellum. That's where most of the reproduction is going to occur. So they switch opposite directions, line up their seminal receptacles with the seminal discharge organ of the other earthworm, and vice versa. They just discharge their sperm. It travels through the clitellum, and then the clitellum essentially turns into this cocoon. So then each worm is able to push the cocoon off the end of their body. So the cocoon slides down to the end. It passes over the oviducts. That's when it's going to actually fertilize the eggs. So you see the sperm and the eggs get fertilized once the cocoon slides over the body. After that happens, it continues, slides off the worm into the soil, and then that cocoon is going to kind of turn into an egg sac for all of the baby worms that are going to grow. So this is kind of how that goes. This is on your paper as well. So again, they line up as opposite directions. They secrete their sperm. The the cocoon then slides off the clitellum, passes the ovaries, fertilizes the eggs, continues off the end, turns into cocoon, and then is able to grow in the soil. The third class, the final class of annelids, are the leeches. This is class Hirudinea. Some people call it Hirudinea. I like Hirudinea, but either way, it doesn't matter. These are the leeches. So most of them are freshwater. There are some terrestrial and marine leeches terrestrial ones that live on plants like insects. I'm not saying insects are of this class, but they live like insects. They are modified in that they still have segmentation, but they have modified their mouths to be suckers that actually can dig into the skin and pull blood, and they essentially secure themselves to a blood vessel. And because they really don't need to move very much, they don't have parapodia or setae, so they're not able to really move very easily. They kind of just rely on their surroundings to get them to their prey. And they are hermaphroditic, so they reproduce just like the earthworms, where they line up opposite. They have their clitellum, and then it fertilizes the eggs, goes off the end, and then goes into the soil and can grow like that. Now, leeches seem terrifying, but really they are used a lot around the world for medical purposes. So for people that have parts of their body where blood starts to pool and they can't get rid of it, then the leech can go on there and do that, where they can pull the blood out of it. We see a rather large leech here, a medium leech, and then extremely small ones. So all of these have been used throughout history and still today for medical purposes. Also, if you have a blood infection, the leeches can pull that blood out while you're getting blood pumped in another location, and they kind of help with filtering that blood, making sure that they assist with anticoagulation. So they secrete these chemicals to keep the blood from clotting, so it doesn't actually form a scab or anything. It just continues to flow, which is good if you are trying to get rid of that poisoned blood. Not good, obviously, if you're trying to hold on to your blood. So in review, we have the annelids, which are known for their major segmentation. They also have some other modifications that allow them to move through the soil, that allow them to be professional at what they do. And the three major classes are class Polychaeta, which means many hairs. They're going to be the segmented worms where you can see lots of setae on the sides. Oligochaeta, those are the worms that you can tell are obviously segmented, but do not have hairs and legs attached to them or parapodia. And then class Hirudinea, which are the leeches. All right, we will pick up with this next time and start focusing on those oligochaetes as we get ready for our earthworm dissection. See you guys soon.